everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Stellantis or FCA US's sales numbers for the US in the third quarter of 2025. Now yesterday Stellantis kind of rolled these numbers out late into the afternoon and I posted them up on Mopar Insiders, but I figured, you know what, let's talk about these sales numbers because it's important to know where the brands are, where they're going, and what vehicles are doing good and vice versa. So the first thing you should know is that Stellantis basically reported that they had sold 324,825 units during the third quarter. Now that's a 6% increase year over year, but what really caught my eye was that September total sales increased by 16% versus the same period last year. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that September really picked up on an upswing in sales. Basically, if you actually look at where it was, a lot of it had to do with the return of the 5.7 liter Hemi and the Ram 1500, as well as a more aggressive pricing structure on several Jeep models. So hopefully that momentum kind of carries into the fourth quarter of 2025. Now, key growth of this period actually came from Chrysler, Jeep, and even Fiat, which had a modest gain of 2%. So if we look at commercial fleet sales, they actually climbed 22%, but nonetheless, Stellantis has been very conservative with their fleet sales recently. If we look at the Jeep brand, now this is where it gets interesting because Jeep had an 11% gain for the third quarter compared to last year. So they sold 160,564 units. However, if we look at the big picture of where they are so far this year compared to where they were last year at the same time, there is no increase. So basically last year they had 449,149 units sold. This year they have 449,973 units sold. So basically not even 830 units really of a difference. So again, there's no increase. So basically what Jeep just did was they made up for those last couple of months that were kind of not stellar. But if you look at the actual lineup, Grand Cherokee still leads the way with a 1% increase for the quarter with 54,553 units sold. And if you look at the overall year for the Grand Cherokee, it's down 4%. They still have sold 154 units or 154,221 units. If we look at the Jeep Wrangler, Wrangler is actually doing really good for 2025. Quarter sales are up 18%, so they sold 42,450 units during the third quarter. If you look at the overall year-to-date sales, they have sold 128,054 units, which is up 13%. The third best-selling Jeep is the Jeep Compass MP. Now, we're still waiting to hear when the new version of the Compass, the J4U Compass, is going to be starting production, but unfortunately the Compass is in a class where it's very competitive, and we're starting to see that because it's old and it's got a lot more competition in it, that the sales are starting to decline a little bit. So for overall year sales, it's down 2%. They still have sold 82,920 units, but for the quarter, it was down 19%. So they sold 28,086 units. The fourth best-selling Jeep was the Wagoneer. Now, on this list, Jeep actually separates the Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer. So the Wagoneer actually had a 122% increase. They sold 16,597 units. While that might sound good, for the whole year, they've only sold 30,213, and that's down 19%. So basically, they made up over half of their year's sales just in this one quarter. Now, Grand Wagoneer, even though that's not the next best-selling vehicle, we'll just talk about it real quick because it's based on the same platform and same vehicle, basically. That ultra-premium Wagoneer sales are down 50%. So they sold 1,303 units for the quarter. If you look at actual sales for the year, they're down 56%. Now, hopefully, this will be boosted because we know that a new Jeep Grand Wagoneer is coming. They've previewed it. It's going to be launched by the end of the year. So hopefully that will, start a turnaround in sales. We can only hope. Now, if we talk about the Gladiator. Now, the Gladiator has never been a strong seller for Jeep. It's been, a lifestyle vehicle. It's a little more of a premium mid-sized truck. And in recent months, basically Bob Bordendorf, the Jeep CEO, has really reconfigured the Gladiator to a more affordable option. So now with these new pricing structures in place, Gladiator sales are actually starting to take off. Now, while they're not huge, they are still gaining. So Jeep sales for the quarter for the Gladiator are up 43%. They sold 13,113 Gladiators. If you look at the actual year-to-date sales so far, they have sold 38,513 units. That's up 18% compared to last year at the same time. So according to what the sales numbers are showing, that pricing restructure is helping the Gladiator. Now, if we look at the Wagoneer S sold 4,163 units for the quarter. And it looks like it's a huge increase compared to last year when they sold 76, but those were internal sales. So really, the Wagoneer S actually went on sale, I think, January. It was early January. So again, while it looks like it's a huge markup in sales, those were like internal sales. However, for the year, the Wagoneer S has sold 10,426 units in the U.S., so it's not doing too bad, but you got to remember that's a global Jeep. It's going to have a more important role in other markets, not just the U.S. On top of that, we still have sales for the Cherokee and Renegade. Now, the Cherokee is going to be finally replaced starting at the end of this month when the new one arrives in dealers. But the leftover models, they actually sold 180 of them. And again, you can see that, the D SUV segment is probably the second most aggressive segment in the US behind full-size trucks. So even though the Wagoneer S is in that segment, it's a premium vehicle where the Cherokee will be more mainstream, and hopefully that will boost Jeep sales tremendously. That's why there's a lot of pressure riding on the new KM Cherokee. So we will be seeing that vehicle very, very soon. If you look at the Renegade was discontinued in December of 2023, but yet still sold 104 leftover vehicles. Compared to last year, it's down 77%. But again, they didn't have vehicles being built at that time. They were just leftovers, and that was 450 units then. But they still have sold about 700 Renegades this year. Now, Jeep desperately needs a replacement for the Renegade. Antonio Filosa has recently said that, along with the Cherokee, the 300, the Ram ProMaster City. There's a bunch of vehicles that he complained that they didn't have replacements for that they axed, and they will have replacements for them. So the Renegade will be replaced in 2027, but we still have to wait. But the key thing is Jeep really doesn't have a vehicle in the $20,000 price range right now. So ultimately, a new Renegade would probably help not only attract younger buyers to the brand, but also get them into the brand where they want to buy future Jeep products. So it's a key vehicle that needs to be replaced. But nonetheless, Jeep Wrangler, the plug-in 4xe model, is still the best-selling plug-in hybrid in the United States. The Grand Cherokee 4xe is the third best-selling one. So keep that in mind. If we look at the Ram brand, now the Ram brand sales have been very interesting. Now Ram is actually splitting up the Ram 1500 and heavy duty in their actual sales numbers, so we get to see exactly how many heavy duties are being built compared to half tons. It was something that they never did up until recently. So overall sales for the Ram brand, they've sold 103,717 units for the third quarter. That is down 5% compared to last year. If you look at Ram's actual sales for the last year, or for the whole year so far compared to last year, basically it's pretty close. So Ram has sold 307,701 units for the year. And then if you look compared to last year, they sold 309. So it's only a decrease of 1%. So again, just like Jeep, they're kind of stagnant. If you look at Ram 1500 sales, they're up 10% in the third quarter. And a lot of that had to do with the return of the Hemi. So they sold 44,349 pickups. If you look at overall sales for the year, it's up 4%. So they've sold 143,264 Ram 1500s. Now, the heavy-duty sales include 2,500, 3,500, 4,500, and 5,500 chassis cabs. So if you look at what Ram has sold in heavy-duty market, they've sold 43,717 units. That's down 11%. And you got to remember, that is coming off of basically a refresh. And we still haven't seen, very few Warlocks, the new Ram 2500 Warlocks and 2500 Expresses reach people just yet. I know one person that got a Warlock early that was on our HD Rams forums. And again, I'm going to actually get a 2500 Express this next week, so I can't wait to test it because there's been a lot of people interested in those Express and Warlock trucks. So hopefully when those actually reach capacity and start getting into dealers, we'll see sales kind of spike a little bit. Now, Ram ProMaster sales were down for the quarter, 21%. Even though fleet sales were up, the actual ProMaster van sales were down by 21%. They sold 15,633 of those. However, for the year, they're up 10%. So they've sold 45,296 vans so far this year. If we look at ProMaster City, again, this is one of the vehicles that was never replaced. However, they sold 18 leftover units, and it's an increase of 350%. But hopefully, we've seen spy photos of what looks to be a Ram ProMaster City replacement coming. Hopefully, they can do something like that and get some more sales on the commercial side for Ram. Now let's talk about Dodge. Dodge is very interesting. So if you actually look at the sales, this is where it gets kind of funny. The Dodge Dart, okay? The Dodge Dart hasn't been in production since 2016. And somehow dealers sold 6 leftover units. So there's dealers that had 9-year-old Dodge Darts on their lots, and they sold 6 of them. And they sold one last year, but nonetheless, they sold 6 of them in this quarter. There was no new Viper sales, but if we see Hornet actually sold 2,839 units. That was down 26%. However, Hornet sales are actually down 45%, and we know that the vehicle has been suspended for 2026. So whatever's left on the lots is what is basically accounted for. There are leftover Dodge Chargers still on lots. They sold 238 of them. And of course, those are leftovers, so there's nothing to replace those vehicles just yet. We are going to get the 6-pack models coming within the next month, so hopefully those numbers will be boosted. But for right now, only 238 were sold during the third quarter. So far this year, only 1,868 Dodge Chargers have been sold. Now, the Dodge Charger Daytona. A lot of people have been interested in how this car is performing. They sold 2,776 units during the third quarter. That puts overall sales so far in the U.S. since this car launched in January at 7,075 units. That's it. Dodge Challenger. All right, Dodge Challenger sold 222 units during the third quarter. If we look at the overall year-to-date sales, they've sold 1,723 Challengers so far. If we look at, this is where it gets really funny. Again, the Dart's not the only one that was a zombie vehicle. The Journey, they sold 13 of them. And they sold 8 Grand Caravans, and those both were discontinued in 2020. So again, those are 5-year-old vehicles, and they sold approximately 21 of them. If we look at the Durango had its best September in a long, long time. Now, basically, I think it was 20 years is when it had its best overall third quarter. I think it's crazy, and a lot of the Dodge is saying, that has to do with Hemi sales. We will see. I think it probably won't affect it just yet. The reason being is because, to me, they got rid of their volume vehicle, which is the Pentastar V6. The Pentastar V6 made up 60% of Durango sales. So it'll be interesting to see how this new Hemi lineup, takes. But nonetheless, sales were up 44%. They sold 20,018 units in the third quarter. So far this year, Durango sales are up 16%. So they have sold 54,417 units. If we look at Dodge's sales for the quarter compared to last year, it's down 2%. They sold 26,120 units. However, if we look at the year-to-date sales, Dodge sales are down 38%, and we know they were down 49% compared to last year earlier. So yeah, 38% down compared to last year, and that's just crazy. They haven't even sold 100,000 units yet. Let's go down to Chrysler, because Chrysler is very interesting. Now, the brand is down for the total for the year. They're down 7%. And a lot of that had to do with the tariffs, because you got to remember, Windsor builds the Pacifica and the Voyager. Now, what makes it interesting is for a while there, they actually didn't export any of those to the U.S. We had kind of dealers waiting for them, but the sales have been strong. In the third quarter, they started shipping them again, and sales are booming. Pacifica is up 30%. So they had basically sold 28,029 units of the Pacifica. The Voyager is back. So again, they sold 4,388 units of the Voyager. So they are up 45% where they were last year's quarter three. Again, still down a little bit, but a lot of that had to do with the tariffs. But if we look at 300 sales, they still have sold 559 300s for the year that were left over, and 71 of those were sold during the third quarter. So again, we're still waiting on a 300 replacement that will come in a couple years, but hopefully soon Chrysler will be getting a good lineup. And again, they are still beating Dodge by almost 17,000 units is what they're beating Dodge so far by this year. So, and another thing is the Pacifica minivan, it's down 15% in sales. However, we might see some really aggressive, incentives and stuff coming, because Chrysler does not want to give it up to Honda and the minivan crown. So we might be seeing some more aggressive incentives towards the end of the year to boost sales because they don't want to lose that. So hopefully we'll see a spike in Chrysler minivan sales even more so. Now let's talk about Fiat. Now again, Fiat really only has one vehicle in their lineup, the 500e. But if we actually look, they have some leftover vehicles, and they did do better than what they did in the last quarter. Last third quarter last year, excuse me. So they were up 2%. And if you, again, I said it was modest because if you actually look at the numbers, they only sold 321 units for the third quarter compared to 316 last year. If you look at their overall sales for the year, they are up 57%. So again, last year, you got to remember, they just had started to launch the 500 at the time, and they really didn't have a vehicle other than the 500 coming up late. So they actually had no new vehicles in the lots, just leftover 500Xs. So they have sold 1,237 vehicles so far this year, where last year they only had 786 at the time. If we look at the 300, the 500, I mean, the 500 is up in sales by 23%. But if you actually look at the numbers, they're not like huge numbers. It's still, they only sold 288 for the quarter. That's more than the 235 they did last year. And again, if you look at the total sales of the 500e, it's only 1,076 units compared to last year's 439. If we look at what they sold elsewise in the brand, they actually had a couple leftover 500Ls. They sold 2 of those. And then if you look at 500Xs, they actually had quite a few leftover of those. They had 31 of them. So again, not stellar numbers. And I think it's one of those points where we're going to have to talk, like, hopefully about Stellantis kind of switching their tactics and realizing that the Italian brands aren't doing good and they need to kind of get rid of them. I know there's like 100 dealers still left out there that are selling Fiats and Alfa Romeos, but unfortunately the sales numbers just don't cut it. Only 1,237 units so far this year. So if we look at Alfa Romeo, here's a different story. They do have more units, but they also have 3 vehicles that are in production. The thing is tariffs have been killing Alfa Romeo because obviously all these vehicles are built in Italy. On top of that, Alfa has not been a strong seller, and the brand has just been going down and down and down in sales over the last couple of years. Even with the new Tonale being a part of the lineup, the Tonale is still the best-selling vehicle in the Alfa Romeo lineup. That basically it sold 953 units for the quarter, but it's not even 1,000 units. If you look at the Stelvio, it's down to 375. The Giulia only sold 286. That's a total of 1,614 units for the quarter. That's down 21% where it was last year. And then if you look at the year to date, last year in total, the whole total of the year, they had sold 8,533 units. Okay. This year so far, they've only sold 4,778. And they're down 30% of where they were at the point last year. So they're not even going to meet their market, like their actual sales goals of last year. So again, this is one of those brands. Both brands have been around since 2012 back in the U.S. market. They need to really focus if they're going to continue to keep in these brands because they're just drawing money from, the company, where they could take this money that they spend for Alfa Romeo and Fiat and market other brands like Chrysler and Dodge a little bit better. So anyways, tell me what you think down below about where the brands are going. Do you think that's good to see that Chrysler's getting, more sales than Dodge, considering it's just a minivan? I know a lot of people thought like, hey, the Chrysler brand is dead. Well, it's not dead. It's actually doing pretty decent. And then tell me what you think of, like the Dodge Dart actually selling 6 units. I'd love to hear what you guys think down below. Tell me what you think that Stellantis should do going forward. And I enjoy reading the comments. So I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.